Rafa, Santos stood just behind the shimmering AGT stage curtain, gripping his old acoustic guitar so tightly his knuckles turned white. The backstage noise buzzed around him, crew members calling out cues, other contestants rehearsing lines, the muffled roar of thousands of people waiting just beyond the stage. But all Rafa could hear was the rapid thumping of his own heartbeat. He had dreamed of this moment for years. Growing up in a tiny barangay in Cebu, he used to sit on the rooftop at night, listening to Elvis songs on a cracked secondhand speaker while imagining an audience cheering for him. But now that he was actually here, the dream felt too big, too bright, almost too real to touch. A stagehand lifted the curtain. "Rafael Santos, you're up." Rafa swallowed hard. His legs felt heavy as he stepped forward, each footfall echoing in his mind like thunder. The moment he crossed the threshold onto the massive AGT stage, the heat of the lights washed over him. A wave of gasps and murmurs rose from the audience as they saw the shy young man in his simple black shirt and worn sneakers. "Hello," Heidi greeted cheerfully. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Rafa leaned into the microphone, his voice barely above a whisper. Rafa, I'm from the Philippines." Simon tilted his head, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "And what are you going to do today?" Rafa's throat tightened. I'll be singing a song. An Elvis song." The audience exchanged glances. Another Elvis act. Simon exhaled and folded his arms, clearly unsure. The tension in the room thickened. Rafa closed his eyes. For a moment, everything went silent. Then he took a deep breath, steadying his shaking hands. This was it, the moment that would change his life forever. The soft instrumental intro floated across the theater, and Rafa stood perfectly still, staring at the floor for a heartbeat. The crowd watched with mild curiosity, some expecting another Elvis impersonation, others already preparing themselves for disappointment. Even Simon's expression suggested he'd seen 100 auditions just like this. But then Rafa lifted his head. The moment his eyes opened, something in him shifted, just a flicker of calm amid the storm of nerves. He stepped slightly closer to the microphone, inhaled deeply, and released the first note of "Can't Help Falling in Love." The effect was instantaneous. A warm, velvety tone, soft but impossibly rich, filled the room. It wasn't forced. It wasn't an imitation. It was a voice that felt like it had lived 100 stories. The audience collectively froze, as if the air around them had turned to glass. Simon's eyes snapped open, his brows shot upward, and he slowly leaned in, elbows resting on the table. Heidi covered her mouth. Sophia whispered something to Howie, who didn't react. He was too stunned to look away. Backstage, crew members paused mid-task, some setting down equipment just to peek through the curtains. One of the camera operators mouthed, "Oh my God." Rafa continued, his voice melting into the melody, smooth and golden like vintage vinyl. His hands stopped trembling. The once terrified boy from Cebu now looked strangely at home on the massive stage, as if he had finally stepped into the world he was always meant to belong to. The audience wasn't just listening. They were spellbound. It wasn't Elvis they heard. It was Rafa, with a voice powerful enough to make time stand still. And for the first time that night, Simon Cowell looked genuinely amazed. As the song flowed into its second verse, something remarkable happened. Rafa's fear began to melt away. The trembling in his hands eased, his shoulders relaxed, and the stiffness in his posture softened. It was as if each note he sang pulled him further out of his shell and closer to the artist he had always wanted to become. He opened his eyes fully now, revealing a quiet confidence that hadn't been there moments earlier. The spotlight glowed around him like a warm halo, and the crowd leaned in instinctively, drawn by an energy they couldn't quite explain. Rafa's voice grew richer, more textured, still reminiscent of Elvis, but undeniably his own. He didn't mimic the King's iconic swagger. He carried a natural rhythm in the way his body swayed ever so slightly with the music. Every gesture felt honest, unpracticed, and deeply authentic. A woman in the front row pressed a hand to her chest, tears forming as his voice wrapped around the room like a soft embrace. A couple stood up quietly, unable to stay seated under the weight of the emotion pouring from the stage. Even the normally noisy upper balcony fell silent, the audience collectively suspended in the moment. The judges were transfixed. Sophia whispered, "He's transforming right in front of us." Howie nodded, speechless. But the most telling reaction came from Simon. He shifted forward in his seat, studying Rafa with razor-sharp focus. It wasn't skepticism anymore, it was fascination, the kind he reserved only for talents he believed were truly rare. Rafa hit a higher note with unexpected power, and a ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. It was no longer the shy Filipino boy who walked onto the stage. It was a young artist awakening, and the world was witnessing it in real time. As the song approached its final chorus, the entire theater seemed to hold its breath. Rafa stood centered in the spotlight, his guitar hanging loosely at his side now. He didn't need it. His voice alone had taken command of the room. He closed his eyes once more, not out of fear this time, but focus. Then he launched into the final line, letting the note rise with a strength no one expected from someone so shy, so young, so unassuming. The note stretched higher, richer, fuller. People in the crowd leaned forward, some gripping their seats, others covering their mouths in disbelief. A few even reached out as if trying to grab the sound drifting from the stage. Simon stared, frozen. It was rare for him to be speechless, rarer still to be emotionally moved. But something about the purity of Rafa's voice, the sincerity, the rawness, hit him unexpectedly hard. Rafa held the final note longer than the original recording, steady, unwavering, almost impossibly controlled. And then, with a gentle vibrato, he let it fade. The theater fell into a moment of complete stillness. No one moved, no one breathed. Then, boom, the entire auditorium exploded into applause so loud the floor seemed to shake. People jumped to their feet. Cheers, whistles, and screams filled the room. Some audience members cried openly, wiping their faces between claps. A group at the back shouted, "Golden buzzer! Hit the buzzer!" Heidi stood first, hands raised in total disbelief. Sophia clapped above her head, grinning ear to ear. Howie mouthed, "Incredible." But the most shocking reaction wasn't from the audience. It was Simon. He sat back, blinking slowly, staring at Rafa like he had just witnessed something once in a generation. And even before he spoke, everyone felt it. Something extraordinary had just happened. For a long moment after the applause, Simon didn't move. He simply stared at Rafa, really stared, as if trying to process what he had just witnessed. The audience waited, buzzing with excitement, some chanting, "Golden buzzer! Golden buzzer!" As gold confetti cannons prepared silently above the stage, Rafa, breathing hard but smiling shyly, looked at the judges with wide, uncertain eyes. He had no idea what was coming. Finally, Simon stood. It was slow, deliberate, dramatic, the kind of moment fans replay for years. The crowd erupted again, screaming even louder. Rafa instinctively put a hand over his heart. Simon raised his other hand to quiet the room, but even he couldn't hide the smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Rafa," he said, his voice low and sincere, "I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't expect that." Not even close. Rafa swallowed, eyes already filling with tears. Simon continued, "I've heard a lot of people try to sing Elvis. Some imitate him, some copy him, but you," he paused, pointing at Rafa. "You honored him, you channeled him, and you made the song your own. That is extremely rare." The audience roared in agreement. Then Simon stepped forward and pressed his palm flat on the golden buzzer. Wham! A blinding burst of gold exploded from above, showering Rafa in a sparkling storm. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed, covering his face as tears finally spilled over. The judges rushed onto the stage. Heidi hugged him first, followed by Sophia and Howie. Simon approached last, placing a hand gently on Rafa's shoulder. "You're not just a singer," he said softly. "You're a star." Rafa looked up through the rain of gold, realizing his entire life had just changed in a single, unbelievable moment.